The courtroom was supposed to fall silent after the judge's final words, but instead it trembled, not from thunder outside, but from Gao Taiyu's breath slipping out like a cracked whisper. The cameras, forbidden but somehow always present around Yu Menglong's name, caught the sheen of sweat on Gao's brow. His hands, trembling like they wanted to leap out of the cuffs, twitched with an urgency that seemed older than the crime itself, older than the night everything went black. The sentence had been delivered, life imprisonment, yet what followed felt like the beginning of something far more cataclysmic. As the gavel struck the air, something inside Gao snapped, like a thread pulled far past its limit, like a truth too heavy to keep inside any longer. The reporters leaned forward, the guards stiffened, and even the judge froze mid-movement as Gao Taiyu suddenly pushed himself to his feet. "I didn't kill Yu Menglong for the reason they think," he rasped, voice hoarse but growing sharper with every syllable. "I killed him because I had no choice. Because someone else was pulling the strings." Gasps slid through the room like wind slicing through leaves, and every device, authorized or smuggled, pointed toward him. But Gao wasn't done. He lifted his face, eyes trembling with desperation, but also burning with the intensity of someone who'd been holding fire in his lungs for far too long. "You want the motive? You want the truth everyone's been terrified to say?" He growled. "Fine. I'll give it to you. But none of you are ready for what comes after." And just like that, the story the public thought they knew tilted off its axis. Because if Gao Taiyu was telling the truth, then Yu Menglong's death wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a darker one. The guards rushed toward him, but the judge raised a hand. Even he, iron-faced and unmoving throughout the entire trial, had been struck by the electricity coursing through the courtroom. He wanted the truth just as desperately as the cameras watching from the shadows. Gao's shackles clinked like chimes in a storm as he steadied himself and inhaled deeply, a breath that carried the weight of everything hidden behind the glittering facade of fame. "What I'm about to say," Gao whispered, "it connects to the message you left. To the people who vanished after working with him. To the recordings you weren't supposed to hear. All of it rhymes. All of it loops. And it all started way before the night they said I killed him." His confession spread like wildfire, and even those watching through illegal live streams felt the chill creeping up their spines. It had the cadence of a curse, the rhythm of a prophecy. Gao's voice cracked, but the words didn't. If anything, they sharpened. Yu Menglong wasn't just a superstar. He wasn't just an actor. He had something extremely dangerous. Something I was told to retrieve. Something he died protecting. The murmurs exploded. The prosecutor rose, shouting objections, but every shout was eaten by the tension devouring the room. Gao Taiyu tightened his jaw and continued. "It was a file," he said, voice trembling but unstoppable. "A file he shouldn't have had. One he told me he was too scared to open, but too scared to destroy." A single word fell from his mouth then, a word that dropped like a sword through the courtroom. Hexagram 7. A ripple of terror flashed through the prosecutor's face, unmistakable, undeniable. Someone inside that courtroom recognized the word. Someone powerful. Someone who'd hoped it would never be spoken in public. And that tiny flinch, visible for exactly half a second, told the world that Gao was not hallucinating, not inventing, not deranged. He was telling the truth. But the truth was more horrifying than the crime. Because the moment that word echoed against the courtroom walls, the lights flickered. The judge glanced upward, confused. Someone in the far corner jumped from their seat. And for the first time since the trial began, a uniformed guard reached toward his earpiece, the silent, subtle tap that meant one thing. Something is happening outside the building. Gao wet his lips, eyes darting between the trembling lights. "Hexagram 7 isn't a project," he said. "It's not a code name. It's a person. And then, it's someone Yu Menglong was trying to protect." The room froze into stone. Someone? Not something? A person. A living, breathing mystery. A secret so explosive that it was enough to end a rising star's life. Gao's knees buckled, but he held his ground. "You begged me," he said. "He told me not to let them get close to Hexagram 7. He said once the cameras cut, once the lights went out, once the masks came off, someone was going to come for him." A reporter shouted, "Who? Who was coming?" Gao laughed, a broken, cracked laugh that sounded like it had been trapped in his ribs for years. "You really think I know? I was just a pawn. They used me. Threatened me. Watched me. I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't realize I was walking straight into their trap. He shook his head violently. That night, I didn't kill Yu Menglong. I confronted him. I begged him to hand over the file. He said no. He said he'd rather die than give it to them. And they made sure he did. Suddenly the door at the back of the courtroom slammed open. A guard shouted. Someone screamed. The judge stood. The lights above crackled once again, but now they surged brightly, too brightly, as if the building's electricity had been hijacked. Then every single bulb went out at once. Darkness swallowed the courtroom. Chaos broke loose. But amid the screams and the clatter of bodies, Gao's voice sliced through like a blade. This is exactly what they did to him. He shouted into the blackness. This is how they warned him. This is how they warned me. Phones lighting up all over the courtroom flickered like scattered fireflies. In that trembling glow, Gao Taiyu's face appeared, hollow, desperate, and glistening with the kind of fear that only surfaces when the truth is too large to contain. When the emergency lights finally blinked on, the courtroom was a mess of overturned chairs, panicked reporters, and armed guards trying to restore order. But Gao Taiyu was smiling. It wasn't a victorious smile. It wasn't a confident smile. It was the smile of a man who had just crossed the point of no return. They're here now, he murmured, eyes fixed on the barely open rear entrance. They heard me. They heard everything. A guard approached him, gripping his shoulder, but Gao didn't resist. He simply whispered. And if I disappear before morning, you'll know I was telling the truth. He paused. And if Yu Menglong's last whisper meant anything, you'll know that this story isn't over. But then he said the sentence that changed everything, the line that journalists replayed 1,000 times, the line that made world headlines and ignited the next chapter of the legend. I didn't kill Yu Menglong to silence him. I killed him to save him. Because the fate waiting for him was 10 times worse than death. Silence. Heavy, dense, suffocating silence. The judge, pale as paper, ordered everyone out. The guards grabbed Gao to escort him away, but he kept talking, spitting out truths faster than they could drag him past the threshold. He knew who Hexagram 7 was, Gao said. He hid them. Protected them. Loved them like blood. And they wanted that person more than they wanted him. He paused, breath shaking. And now they want me. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters screamed his name. The guards forced him toward the hallway. But just before he disappeared from sight, Gao Taiyu turned back, eyes locked on the cameras with a clarity that chilled millions who would later replay this moment online. Yu Menglong added one line to the recording they said was lost. He whispered, barely audible. He said, "If I die, look for the one who doesn't exist." And then he was gone. Dragged down a hallway that suddenly looked far too dark. Escorted by guards who suddenly looked far too silent. Followed by shadows that suddenly looked far too intentional. The courtroom doors slammed shut. And outside, the world erupted. Because once again, Yu Menglong's story had twisted into something unfathomable, something rhythmic with every clue that came before, something deeper, darker, more impossible to untangle. And now everyone wanted to know. Who, or what, is Hexagram 7? Why was Yu Menglong protecting them? And why did Gao Taiyu think death was the merciful option? One thing was certain. This wasn't just a confession. It was a warning. And the story is far from over. The courtroom was still shaking from Gao Taiyu's last words, but the true fracture came in the seconds after he was dragged toward the hallway. Everyone thought the drama had ended with his disappearance behind the wooden doors. But that was only the surface. Beneath it, the room pulsed with something feverish, a sense that the truth had slipped between the cracks, and now something was crawling out after it. A single microphone left on the judge's table picked up Gao's final echo, the whisper he hadn't meant to broadcast, the one that somehow leaked through the entire sound system. He didn't scream when he died, he whispered a name. The audio trembled across the courtroom speakers like a ghostly vibration. Reporters froze. The judge spun toward the sound technician, who stood helplessly shaking his head, mouthing, "I didn't touch anything." Bodies leaned forward. Breath stalled. Because if Yu Menglong whispered a name before death, who was it addressed to? And why did Gao sound like someone who'd been haunted by that voice every night since? The lights flickered again. Not a full blackout this time, more like a warning. A pulse. A heartbeat. Outside the courtroom, the hallway erupted in shouting, footsteps pounding, something heavy crashing to the floor. The guards inside exchanged glances. Two rushed toward the doors. A journalist screamed, demanding to know what was happening. The judge shouted for order, but authority had already dissolved into panic. Then, the doors slammed open on their own. Not from the inside, but as if something from outside had shoved them with impossible force. For a moment, nobody breathed. The hall behind the open doors was dim, emergency lights casting long shadows that stretched like claws across the floor. Gao Taiyu was nowhere in sight. Not a guard. Not a footstep. Not a whisper. Gone. All of them. As if swallowed whole. One reporter, trembling, raised his phone to film, but the moment the screen faced the hallway, the phone surged hot in his hands. Sparks spat from the edge and the device snapped in two, blacking out violently. He screamed and dropped it, shaking his burned fingers. Whatever had happened to Gao Taiyu, it wasn't natural. But the true shock came next. A faint glow appeared at the far end of the hallway, soft, blue-white, pulsating slowly. A shimmer. A flicker. Something that didn't belong in any federal building. The prosecutor, pale and shaking, stepped backward. "Turn the lights back on," he yelled, but the technician was already frantically flipping switches. Nothing responded. Not a single bulb even attempted to awaken. The glow grew brighter. Someone whispered, "Is that a reflection?" Someone else responded, "Reflection of what?" And then the glow began to move, not walking, not running, but drifting, as though it floated above the floor, leaving a faint, rippling distortion in its wake. Every eye locked onto it. Because the shape that slowly took form within the glow looked disturbingly like a silhouette. A silhouette that looked human. The judge stumbled backward, colliding with the wall. "Everyone! Evacuate! Now!" But no one moved. Because the silhouette paused. Stilled. And then raised its head, as though looking directly into the courtroom. A shiver sliced through the crowd. Then, the lights exploded back on. The glow vanished. The hallway was empty. Every guard who had escorted Gao Taiyu was gone. And the only trace left behind was a smear of silver-gray dust on the floor, a substance that seemed to shimmer like crushed glass when the emergency lights hit it. The judge ordered all recording devices confiscated. But it was already too late. The live streamers had broadcast everything. The hallway. The glow. The silhouette. The receptionist in the lobby screamed when the footage hit the screens. Hashtags began exploding online within seconds. Hashtag Gao gone. Hashtag courtroom shadow. Hashtag hexagram warning. But inside the courtroom, something even stranger occurred. The silver dust began to move. Slowly. Softly. Like sand shifting in a breeze no one felt. A pattern formed on the floor, smooth curves bending into straight lines curling into symbols. The crowd backed away, but the judge stepped forward, unable to deny what was happening. A message was forming. One symbol. Then another. Then a final one, drawn as though by an invisible fingertip dragging across the polished tiles. The courtroom interpreter gasped first. "It's a trigram," she whispered. "From the I Ching." The judge stared at her. "Which one?" Her lips trembled. "Hexagram 7. No one breathed. No one dared. Because the symbol on the floor, it was identical to the name Gao Taiyu had shouted moments earlier. Identical to the word that made the prosecutor flinch. Identical to the fear that had cracked Gao open during the sentencing. Hexagram 7 wasn't a myth. It wasn't a lie. It was real, real enough to write on the floor of a courtroom without a single living person touching it. And it had answered Gao's confession. Reporters backed up, trembling. One whispered, "It's trying to communicate." Another whispered, "With who?" And another, "Does this mean Gao was telling the truth?" But then something happened that made every soul in the room go silent. The silver dust lifted off the floor, just an inch, swirling upward into the air like a tiny storm, gathering, converging, spinning faster and faster until it compacted into a small shape. A folded piece of paper. It dropped to the ground. The judge stared at it for what felt like an hour before stepping forward. He picked it up with trembling hands. The entire courtroom held its breath. He unfolded it. And frozen silence flooded the room. The paper held only 4 words. Written in Yu Menglong's unmistakable handwriting. The same handwriting from his journals. The same handwriting from his scripts. The same handwriting from the final message they claimed was lost. 4 words. 4 impossible, reality-shattering words. He didn't kill me. The judge's knees buckled. Someone screamed. Another fainted. Because now the courtroom knew. Everything they believed was wrong. Gao Taiyu's confession wasn't insanity. His fear wasn't guilt. His motive wasn't murder. And Yu Menglong might not be dead. At least, not in the way the world imagined. The lights flickered once more. This time, it felt like a warning. A countdown. A promise that whatever force had taken Gao Taiyu, whatever shadow had bent the hallway lights, whatever entity had written on the floor, wasn't finished. And if Yu Menglong truly whispered to the darkness before he died, the world was about to learn why. And who. And what Hexagram 7 really was. Because this story, this impossible, spiraling, electric story, had only just drawn its second breath.